trust is a fragile thing, built slowly, destroyed instantly. And on a quiet Ohio night, inside a home filled with sleeping children, trust didn't just break. It was shattered so violently that a family would never be the same again. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. This story begins the way so many tragedies do, with something that seemed ordinary, familiar, and safe. A mother getting ready for an overnight shift. A lifelong friend stepping in to help with childcare, like she had many times before. A house full of kids who believed the night would be just like every other. A movie, some snacks, then sleep. Nothing felt dangerous. Nothing felt wrong. Not yet. But by the next morning, 1-year-old Layla Bilby would be fighting for her life in a hospital ICU. And the woman her family trusted most, 37-year-old babysitter Amanda Greger, would be wearing handcuffs. And the question everyone is still asking is the one no parent ever wants to imagine. How does someone you trust turn into the person your child needs protection from? That night, the weather in Goshen Township, Ohio was cold, quiet, and uneventful. The kind of night perfect for sleep. Inside the house on Woodville Pike, 6 children settled in. 4 belonged to the mother who was heading to work. The other 2 were Amanda's own kids. Amanda wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a babysitter hired off an app. She wasn't a neighbor doing this for the first time. She had been a lifelong friend. The person the mother called when she needed help. The person she believed would care for her kids like her own. But prosecutors say that when the mother shut the door behind her that night, she unknowingly left her children in the care of someone who was intoxicated, impaired, and carrying substances that would later become central to the case. According to court records and Amanda's own admissions, she consumed vodka, THC, unprescribed muscle relaxers. Whether this was routine for her or a one-time lapse, nobody knows. But according to prosecutors, it set the stage for the nightmare that followed. The house was quiet. No screaming neighbors. No sounds of chaos. Nothing to signal what investigators would later describe as one of the most egregious cases they had seen involving a babysitter and a child. As the night went on, what happened behind that closed door remains a haunting mystery. There were no cameras, no eyewitnesses publicly confirmed, and none of the children, at least so far, have been discussed as having seen anything. But what was found the next morning was more than enough to raise alarms. At 8:30 a.m., November 10th, the mother returned home. Exhausted from her shift, she expected to find the kids sleeping, maybe watching cartoons. Instead, she walked into horror. Amanda stood there in a hoodie that wasn't just dirty. It was stained with what looked like blood and vomit. Her face pale, her demeanor off. Something felt wrong. And then the mother saw her daughter, Layla, unresponsive, limp, silent, no crying, no reaction. No sign of normal distress, just a horrifying stillness. Panic took over. A frantic rush to the hospital. Doctors taking Layla from her arms. Machines turning on. Alarms beeping. Medical teams shouting instructions. What they found was not the result of a fall. Not something a toddler could have done to herself. Not even close. Dozens of injuries. Multiple types of trauma. Patterns that doctors recognized instantly. What they told investigators was clear and chilling. This was non-accidental trauma. And the moment those words were documented, the case changed instantly, from a nightmare to a criminal investigation. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Back at the home, police executed a search that revealed even more disturbing details. Inside the bedroom where Layla had slept, investigators found bloodstains. Multiple areas, not a single spot. The kind of staining that signals movement, contact, and struggle. Then came the most troubling discovery. The infant's clothes. The ones she had been wearing the night before. They weren't in a hamper. They weren't in a diaper bag. They were in the washing machine, already washed. But the stains were still visible. Detectives later testified that this looked like an attempt to destroy evidence. A detail that would eventually become a key charge in the indictment against Amanda. Other items were collected too. Bedding, garments, the stained hoodie Amanda wore. All of it documented, photographed, and sent for forensic analysis. And while police gathered physical evidence, doctors at Cincinnati Children's Hospital continued evaluating Layla, uncovering the full extent of her injuries: a brain bleed, retinal hemorrhaging, possible spinal trauma, bruised lungs and fluid around organs, life-threatening internal swelling, the kind of injuries doctors usually see in cases of violent shaking or blunt force trauma. Not accidents, not slips, not rough play, not benign mistakes. Something happened that night, and it hurt a baby so severely that she had to be placed on life support. What investigators and prosecutors now had on their hands wasn't just a tragedy. It was a criminal case with a child at the center. Too young to speak, too hurt to move, too vulnerable to tell anyone what she endured. News of the arrest spread quickly across Claremont County. Neighbors were stunned. Friends were furious. Strangers were heartbroken, because the betrayal wasn't just violent, it was deeply personal. Amanda wasn't just a babysitter. She had been trusted, welcomed, relied on, considered family. And now, she was accused of nearly killing the one-year-old child of a woman who thought she'd known her all her life. As the police built their case, one truth became clear. Whatever happened in that house that night was not normal, not accidental, not explainable by intoxication alone. And the more investigators uncovered, the more disturbing the timeline became. But the biggest question, the one that still lingers, is this: what exactly happened between the time the mother left for work and the moment she returned to find her daughter unresponsive? The evidence suggests something violent. The washed clothes suggest something hidden. The injuries suggest something prolonged. But no one, not even Amanda, has ever given a clear explanation. Not yet. And that silence is almost as chilling as the crime itself. What investigators found inside the home: blood patterns, washed clothing, contradictory statements, and the forensic timeline that prosecutors say proves how the night unfolded. The morning after what should have been a routine night of babysitting, the quiet Ohio home on Woodville Pike became the center of a growing nightmare. For investigators from the local police department, stepping into that house on November 10th, 2025, was like walking into a crime scene straight from a nightmare. One prosecutor would later call it a horror scene, and it's not hard to see why. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. It all began when medical staff at Cincinnati Children's Hospital flagged the case as suspected child abuse. The child in question, Layla Bilby, a one-year-old girl known as a joyful, giggling infant by her family, had arrived at the hospital with injuries that no ordinary childhood accident could explain. According to doctors, her condition was critical: brain bleeding, retinal hemorrhaging, possible spinal trauma, and fluid accumulation around vital organs. These were not the marks of a fall from a couch, a tumble down a few stairs, or the usual bumps and scrapes toddlers accumulate in their first year. Doctors determined someone had intentionally harmed her. Once notified, police quickly mobilized and obtained a search warrant to enter the home. What they found would confirm their worst suspicions. From the moment they stepped across the threshold, officers could see that this was not the scene of a minor incident. It was a scene under investigation. Reports confirmed that bloodstains were found in the bedroom, on the sheets, and on the floor, tracing a pattern of trauma that pointed to violence, not accident. Perhaps most chilling of all was the washing machine. Inside were the clothes Layla had been wearing the night before. To the casual observer, they may have looked like any other load of laundry, but officers immediately noticed something deeply troubling. The stains were faint but unmistakable. Blood, likely diluted by water but still visible. Whoever had put those garments in the machine had attempted to erase evidence, an act interpreted by investigators as a calculated effort to cover up a crime, to scrub away a truth that could not be hidden. Beyond the physical evidence, the atmosphere in the home was documented. Investigators described the environment as containing disorder. Toys were present, bedding appeared blood-soaked, and clothing was reportedly strewn about. The combination of evidence of violence, an apparent attempted cleanup, and the presence of other children in the home painted a disturbing picture of a night gone horrifically wrong. Police immediately began documenting everything in meticulous detail. Photographs, collection of bedding, clothing, and the hoodie worn by Amanda Greger. Every stain, every fragment of physical evidence was recorded, because in cases like this, even the smallest detail can become critical. In the hospital, the diagnosis only added gravity to the situation. Pediatric specialists classified Layla's injuries as non-accidental trauma, a medical determination that carries enormous weight in legal proceedings. Her retinal hemorrhaging alone is considered a hallmark of shaken baby syndrome, though combined with brain bleeding and potential spinal injuries, doctors concluded that multiple forms of force had been applied. Every new medical finding tightened the focus on the babysitter who had been in charge that night. By mid-morning, the situation had escalated from suspected abuse to a full-blown criminal investigation. Amanda Gregor, the 37-year-old babysitter who had been entrusted with 6 children, including 2 of her own, was placed under scrutiny. Prosecutors soon presented a 9-count indictment against her, including charges of child endangering, felonious assault, and evidence tampering. The severity of the charges reflected the magnitude of the injuries and the apparent attempt to destroy evidence, signaling the prosecutor's determination to pursue the case aggressively. While the law moved quickly, questions remained. Exactly what happened during those overnight hours? There were no video cameras in the home, and no eyewitnesses have been publicly confirmed. Investigators were left to reconstruct a night that had left a 1-year-old girl fighting for her life and a community in shock. Then there was the question of motive. Why would a babysitter, someone described as a lifelong friend of the family, a trusted figure who had cared for the children before without incident, inflict such devastating harm? Reports revealed that Amanda had admitted to consuming vodka, THC, and unprescribed muscle relaxers while babysitting, leaving her impaired and disoriented. Prosecutors argued that her intoxication may have been a factor in the alleged recklessness or actions, but defense attorneys could later contend that it was not the cause of deliberate harm. This question of intent, whether the injuries were the result of recklessness, negligence, or deliberate action, would become central to the case. Other children in the house also complicated matters. 4 of the Bilby children, along with Amanda's own 2, were in the home at the time. Did they witness what happened? Did they hear cries for help? Investigators would need to determine whether these children were potential witnesses or could provide corroborating details about the timeline of events. Each account, each interview could prove vital. Community outrage quickly grew. Neighbors who had seen Amanda as a responsible, familiar figure struggled to reconcile the friendly babysitter they knew with the allegations now surfacing. On social media, residents voiced disbelief and anger, with many asking how a person so trusted could allegedly cause such harm. The case became not just a legal matter, but a public reckoning over trust, responsibility, and the safety of children. As the investigation progressed, the focus remained on Layla's survival. Even as evidence mounted against Amanda, the community and the medical staff's priority was her recovery. Doctors provided updates that reflected both hope and caution. Infant brains are fragile. Injuries of this magnitude could result in long-term neurological damage, and recovery would require weeks, possibly months, of intensive care and monitoring. Throughout the investigation, every new detail added to the chilling narrative. Blood in multiple locations, washed clothing that failed to conceal the truth, eyewitness reports from family members, and Amanda's own admission of being intoxicated. Each piece formed a puzzle, pointing investigators toward a conclusion that would shape both legal proceedings and public perception. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, uncertainty lingered. What triggered this night of horror? Was it the combination of substances Amanda consumed? Was it an unforeseen reaction to stress, fatigue, or emotional instability? Or was there something deeper, more deliberate, lurking beneath the surface? The investigator's task was not only to prove that a crime occurred, but to understand how and why so that justice could be served. And in the background, Layla fought for her life. The stakes were high, with much lost and much that could still be saved. Her survival became the silent center around which the investigation, the legal battles, and community outrage revolved. Without her, the case would be abstract. With her, it was urgent, heartbreaking, and profoundly real. The stage was set for the next chapter, the hospital battle, where survival was uncertain and hope fragile. The evidence had been collected, the charges filed, and the questions mounting. But now, the focus would shift to the tiny patient who had endured what no child ever should, and the family watching every moment with terror and hope intertwined. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. When Layla Bilby arrived at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, the scope of her injuries immediately set off alarms. Doctors described her condition as catastrophic, with trauma that no ordinary accident could have caused. Brain bleeding, retinal hemorrhaging, possible spinal injuries, bruised lungs, and fluid accumulation around vital organs painted a harrowing picture of what she had endured during the night in the care of the babysitter who was supposed to protect her. Every symptom, every indicator spoke of extreme violence, and every heartbeat was a race against time. Layla was rushed to the neonatal intensive care unit NICU, a world of blinking monitors, sterile smells, and constant vigilance. She was placed on a ventilator, her tiny body heavily sedated to prevent further stress or damage. Nurses and doctors worked with painstaking precision, each movement calculated, each procedure critical. Her fragile form, so small and innocent, was now at the center of a medical battle that demanded every ounce of expertise. For her mother, Melissa Bilby, the news was unbearable. Melissa had left for an overnight shift on November 9th, trusting Amanda Gregor, a longtime friend and familiar figure, with the safety of her children. To find her infant daughter clinging to life in an ICU bed was a betrayal she could hardly comprehend. Shock gave way to fear, fear to grief, and grief to determination. She vowed to remain by Layla's side, every moment, every breath. Family and friends rallied around Melissa. A GoFundMe was quickly set up to support both mother and child, describing Layla's injuries in stark terms. Brain bleed, bruised lungs, fluid along the spine and around the heart. It warned that recovery would be a long, uncertain road, spanning weeks or even months. Donations poured in, messages of support flooded social media, and a community that had been shocked by the allegations came together in a desperate show of solidarity. Strangers, neighbors, even former acquaintances offered prayers and financial assistance, hoping to ease the burden on a family suddenly thrown into crisis. Every day in the hospital became a tense balance of hope and dread. Medical staff explained that infant brains are especially delicate, and that even with aggressive care, the risk of long-term neurological damage was real. Developmental delays, permanent physical impairments, and emotional trauma all loomed as possibilities. Each minute the ventilator hummed, each dose of sedation administered, carried the weight of life and death. For Melissa, every sound, a cry, a whimper, a cough, was likely amplified, interpreted, agonized over in her grief. And yet, amidst the fear, small victories began to emerge. After several days, Layla was removed from the ventilator. She began to breathe independently, a fragile but monumental step toward recovery. Friends described the moment as miraculous. Nurses noted subtle improvements. A small smile, a slight wiggle of her fingers, a momentary coup. These glimpses of normalcy were bittersweet, because for every sign of progress, there were moments of regression. Brief seizures, drops in oxygen saturation, or sudden spikes in heart rate. Being off the ventilator did not mean the fight was over. Layla remained in a step-down unit, a controlled environment where medical staff could monitor her minute by minute. Neurological assessments and brain imaging became daily routines, each exam a reminder of her vulnerability. Every flicker of movement, each cry, was both relief and fear. For a 1-year-old who had experienced the unimaginable, each small step forward represented resilience beyond her years, and every setback reminded those watching that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. The impact on Melissa's other children was a natural concern. They had spent the night in the same home as Layla, perhaps sensing the chaos that unfolded. While the details they remembered may never be fully known, their mother's grief and fear likely resonated with them. Siblings oscillated between hope and despair, struggling to understand why someone they knew could betray their family so completely. For Melissa, the weight of motherhood intensified. She was now the protector, the advocate, the constant presence at her daughter's bedside, juggling grief, responsibility, and practical concerns, all while navigating the intense scrutiny of police and media attention. The community response was immediate and visceral. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of support, outrage, and disbelief. Neighbors who had seen Amanda as a responsible, familiar figure struggled to reconcile the friendly, familiar babysitter they had known with the allegations now being investigated. Questions swirled. How could someone so trusted allegedly commit such violence? How could a 1-year-old suffer such injuries while in the care of a friend? Local news outlets repeatedly covered the story, reporting on Layla's condition, the hospital updates, and the growing legal battle. Meanwhile, the legal system moved in tandem with the medical drama. Prosecutors faced mounting pressure to act decisively, not just to build a case, but to demonstrate that justice would be sought for Layla. The evidence from the home, blood-stained bedding, washed but still tainted clothing, the hoodie Amanda Gregor had worn, and her admission of substance use, formed the backbone of the indictment. Yet questions of intent, recklessness, and the babysitter's impaired state would eventually become central points of contention in court. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Each day, the medical and legal stories intertwined. Every report from the hospital reminded the public why the investigation mattered. The stakes were not abstract. They were intensely personal and immediate. Layla's tiny body bore witness to what had occurred that night. Every improvement in her condition offered hope for justice, and every setback underscored the need for accountability. Doctors and nurses, while cautious, also noted the child's remarkable resilience. In Layla's case, each small milestone, an independent breath, a sip of water, a fleeting smile, was celebrated as a victory against overwhelming odds. But medical staff were careful to temper optimism. While survival was possible, long-term effects could include physical impairments, learning challenges, and emotional difficulties that might not manifest for years. For Melissa, each day was a test of endurance. Her personal grief and fear were compounded by the need to advocate for her daughter's well-being, coordinate with doctors, communicate with the media, and prepare for a trial that would demand every detail of that night be examined and scrutinized. The emotional toll was immense, yet she remained a steadfast presence, a pillar of hope amid uncertainty. As Layla continued her precarious recovery, the community and media remained closely engaged. Local residents expressed disbelief that someone so familiar and trusted could allegedly inflict such harm. Supporters of the family and concerned citizens alike called for justice, while investigators pieced together the timeline, the evidence, and the substance of Amanda Gregor's alleged actions. The story became a cautionary tale of trust, vulnerability, and the fragile safety of children left in the care of others. And through it all, Layla remained the quiet center of the storm. Her small victories, her breaths, and her cries reminded everyone that the investigation and the impending trial were not just about the legal system, but about a child's future. Her resilience became both a source of hope and a reminder of the stakes. Justice, accountability, and the chance for her to reclaim the innocence that had been violently disrupted. By early December 2025, the case against Amanda Gregor had crystallized into a chilling narrative of trust broken and a child nearly lost. Prosecutors formally indicted Gregor on 9 counts, ranging from felonious assault to child endangering, with the addition of tampering with evidence, a charge that underscored the deliberate actions investigators believed she took to cover her tracks. From the moment she stepped into the Claremont County Courthouse, the gravity of the situation was palpable. Media lined the hallways, reporters jostled for positions, and cameras clicked constantly, capturing a woman accused of betraying the trust of a family she had known for years. For Amanda, who had been a familiar figure in the community, the transformation from trusted babysitter to criminal defendant was stark, unrelenting, and public. The initial bond hearing set bail at $500,000, a figure that reflected not just the severity of the alleged crimes, but also the community's outrage and the perceived risk if she were released. Gregor was remanded to the Claremont County Jail, where she would await trial, leaving a shadow of fear and uncertainty hanging over the family and the neighborhood. Prosecutors presented a case steeped in both medical and physical evidence. They painted a damning portrait: a babysitter who admitted to using alcohol, THC, and unprescribed muscle relaxers, who left a home in chaos and whose intoxication coincided with Layla's near-fatal injuries. In court filings, they asserted there was no doubt that Gregor caused the harm, emphasizing the incongruence between the severity of the injuries and any possible accidental explanation. The medical diagnosis of non-accidental trauma became a cornerstone of the prosecution. Expert testimony detailed the nature of Layla's injuries: a brain bleed, retinal hemorrhaging, possible spinal trauma, fluid around the lungs and heart, and other internal injuries that could not have resulted from ordinary falls or play. Forensic pediatric specialists explained how each wound reflected trauma, neglect, and an environment that placed a vulnerable infant at extreme risk. Physical evidence from the home painted an equally disturbing picture. Investigators highlighted blood-stained bedding, the hoodie Gregor had worn, and the baby's clothing, washed but still bearing traces of blood, as indications that someone had tried to erase the evidence. For prosecutors, these details were not merely technicalities. They were proof of conscious, deliberate actions taken to cover up the harm. Gregor's admission to substance use further intensified the case against her. Prosecutors argued that intoxication did not excuse the behavior but instead heightened her culpability, demonstrating recklessness and disregard for the safety of a child entrusted to her care. Every word, every fact, added layers to the narrative of a night gone tragically wrong. Yet the defense retained options to contest the narrative. Public records indicate no video surveillance captured the events, and no independent eyewitnesses beyond the mother have been disclosed. Defense strategies could include questioning the timing and impact of Gregor's intoxication, disputing medical interpretations, or suggesting alternative explanations for the injuries. While the prosecution's case appeared strong, the courtroom battle would ultimately revolve around establishing intent, recklessness, and the credibility of testimony. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. For Layla Bilby, the courtroom was a new front in the fight for her daughter's future. Layla's hospitalization, fraught with uncertainty, was only the beginning. Now Melissa faced the emotional toll of testifying, reliving the horror of discovering her baby in critical condition, and confronting the woman she had once considered a trusted friend. The courtroom proceedings amplified grief, fear, and anger, emotions that were raw, immediate, and unavoidable. The community watched closely, a collective witness to a story that had unfolded in what should have been the safe walls of a home. Neighbors expressed disbelief that someone they had trusted could allegedly inflict such harm. Conversations in the community revolved around questions of vigilance, trust, and how such a tragedy could be prevented in the future. For many, the courtroom proceedings were not merely a legal necessity. They were a moral reckoning. The trial also cast a spotlight on broader issues: childcare safety, substance use, and accountability. Experts in child welfare and pediatric trauma commented on the delicate nature of infant care and the catastrophic outcomes when negligence intersects with deliberate harm. Discussions in local media framed the case as both an isolated horror and a cautionary tale, a story with lessons for parents, caregivers, and community members alike. Each day in court brought new layers of tension. Witnesses described the timeline of events, the emergency response, and the evidence collected from the home. Medical experts detailed the injuries in painstaking detail, translating clinical jargon into a narrative that revealed both the severity of the trauma and the vulnerability of the infant. Prosecutors emphasized the pattern of concealment, arguing that the washed clothing and chaotic scene demonstrated an awareness of wrongdoing, reinforcing the narrative of deliberate action. As the trial progressed, the emotional stakes for the family remained intense. Melissa's presence in the courtroom was not just symbolic, it was essential. Every testimony, every exhibit, and every legal argument intersected with the lived reality of watching her daughter fight for survival. Layla's recovery, still fragile, became a central point. The law would not just weigh evidence, but also the impact on a young life hanging in the balance. Outside the courthouse, the community's response continued to evolve. Social media discussions oscillated between outrage and empathy, commentary and support. Fundraisers for Layla remained active, Messages of solidarity flooded in from strangers, and local businesses offered assistance. The story resonated widely. It was not just a crime story. It was a human story, one that highlighted the fragility of trust and the resilience of those affected by its breach. For prosecutors, the goal was clear: justice for Layla. This meant not only securing a conviction but also demonstrating that the legal system could respond decisively to the betrayal of trust and the deliberate endangerment of a child. Every piece of evidence, every expert opinion, every emotional testimony reinforced the need for accountability. Yet even as the legal machinery moved forward, questions lingered. Would the defense be able to cast doubt on the timeline or the impact of Gregor's intoxication? Could any aspect of the evidence be challenged in court? And most importantly, would the legal process provide a measure of closure for a family forever changed by the events of one night? For Melissa and her loved ones, the courtroom became a battleground not only for justice but for hope. Layla's life, still fragile, symbolized both the tragedy of the past and the possibility of recovery. Each day of the trial reminded the family and community that while the crime had been devastating, the pursuit of truth and accountability remained a moral imperative. As the proceedings unfolded, the story of that night on Woodville Pike was meticulously dissected. The babysitter's actions, the medical response, the evidence at the home, and the impact on the infant. Every argument in court was a thread in a complex tapestry of betrayal, innocence, and the struggle for justice. For those following the case, it was clear that the courtroom would ultimately decide not just the fate of Amanda Gregor, but also the sense of closure and security for Layla and her family. Layla remained at the heart of the story, a fragile but remarkable symbol of resilience. Her recovery, painstaking and gradual, served as a reminder of why the pursuit of justice mattered. The courtroom drama, the media coverage, and the community scrutiny all revolved around the hope that truth would prevail, that accountability would be enforced, and that a one-year-old girl could grow up safe despite the night that almost ended her life. The case of Amanda Gregor is a stark reminder of the fragility of trust. It exposes the vulnerability of children in the care of others and highlights the crucial need for accountability, vigilance, and justice. As the trial continued, the community, the media, and the family remained united in one common goal: to ensure that the wrongs of that night were addressed, and that Layla's future, however uncertain, would be defended by every legal and moral standard available. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.